So we're going to talk about careers that can be facilitated by knowledge mobilization, careers around knowledge mobilization, and how knowledge mobilization as a new and emerging paradigm for academic research and community and government and private sector and labor, etc., the non-academic stakeholder community, how we can enable that, connect those connections between the university and the outside. Peter's going to start, but I'm going to ask, who knows what knowledge mobilization is? Okay. Who can tell me what knowledge transfer is? Knowledge translation? Knowledge translation.
Taking knowledge acquired in one context and using it in a different one.
That's good. That's a good basis of that. There are lots of words around this: knowledge exchange, knowledge transfer and exchange, knowledge mobilization, knowledge utilization, knowledge integration. There's lots of the acronyms coming out. There are academic differences to all of these, and we'd be happy in some other place to talk about those. But what we're talking about is creating a two-way interchange of knowledge and of people between the university and stakeholders, organizations outside of the university. So there's lots of subtle differences, some not so subtle, in the KIs and KTs and KTEs and KMs and KMBs. But really, we know what it is when we see it, and Peter and I are practitioners of this. So we're here, we prefer just to do it rather than get enamored with the discourse around the letters and the alphabet soup.
Although it comes about, this morning I was writing a white paper for occupational health and safety, and they're trying to say, okay, what's the state of art of knowledge mobilization in occupational health and safety? And they're interested in the academic part because they're a bunch of academics, so it fits into what they're doing. But what they're really trying to do is increase the value of what they're doing. So, hi Michelle. Let me just take, when David and I were talking about this session, we were thinking knowledge mobilization really came out of SHRC, out of the Social Science Humanities Research Council as a term. But what I thought I would do is put a little bit of context in terms of what we mean about knowledge mobilization. So the summary, what I'm going to talk about briefly, and I think that within this session there's lots of time for discussion and questions and foresight in terms of where you would want to go. Okay, so it's very open, and if you have a question in the middle of a presentation, like in the middle of the presentation, feel free to ask the question. It won't throw me off. So essentially I'm going to give you my perspective. As someone engaged in knowledge mobilization, I'll give you a little bit about my education path, my career path, the creation of a private consulting, research, enabling company, some of my clientele and some of the projects that I'm involved in to give you perspective. So how many in this room are students? So quite a few. How many of you are academics or researchers? Okay. How many of you work for a not-for-profit organization? Government? One. Okay. Business? Okay. A few. Okay, so mostly students and people within the university. So knowledge mobilization and definitions are like anything else. They help bring an understanding, but you can break them apart and become increasingly subtle on them. So when I'm working with clients and organizations, I define knowledge mobilization as a complex process of making what we know ready for service or action to create value. Okay? And anybody who's into language knows that there's a lot of things that are bundled in that definition. So in order to create a short definition, we have it's very compact. But part of the perspective here is that never in human history have we hunted for so much data and information. And never in human history have we gathered so much that's useful, but not necessarily used. And you can look at, and there are all sorts of measures of that. There's citation indexes, and there's you can do raw economic analysis in terms of the dollars going into research versus the dollars coming out. I mean, there's all sorts of ways of measuring that. I don't want to equate money with value, right? The money is a proxy of value. It's an exchange proxy. There's this growing feeling, especially among the people that I deal with, of being overfed with information. And so they're suffering from data obesity or infoglut or whatever buzzword you want to add to it.
Infoglut. I like that. Infoglut.
So this chart, this colorful chart, I just changed my slide background, so the colors all changed on it. But I like it. This is a summary. I spent 6 years at SHRC, at the Social Science Humanities Research Council, and my last job was in knowledge mobilization. And when I was trying to understand research, I came to understand it as three basic questions. What? So what? And now what? So if we think about, I just gave a presentation at one of the NCEs, and they gave me a key that has a laser pointer on it's the cap of the USB port's a laser, so I thought it was kind of cool. It's the first time I'm using it. So if we think about the what, right, it's from multiple inputs from research and practice and experience and culture, and the what are the data, the information, the descriptions, the stories. And a lot of what we do in research is collect that, right? We build it up. We sometimes do analysis and interpretation and give meaning to it, which is really answering the question of so what. And sometimes what we do leads to decisions, directions, and actions, which is now what. And now what is really how we create value. And what I've done here, I like to play with words, and so all of the value propositions start with a P, and we could go on. I have 107 of these. But sometimes they're programs, policies, priorities, processes, practice. We can have products, changes of perspective, procedures, possibility, new people skills. And in moving from what to now what, we need incentives to share between levels. We need initiatives supporting infrastructure and innovation. And this precipitates more research, right? So it's a cycle. And so one of the first things to think about when you're thinking about knowledge mobilization is that it's a cycle, right? The challenge, and this is back to a conversation in 2002, one of the challenges of the president of the organization at the time was saying is that so much of what was being produced in research wasn't having the value-added, there weren't value-added processes that would lead to further value creation, right? So that we were producing the what and the so what and not necessarily getting to now what. Yet when you open up the newspaper, social science and humanities in this context were ubiquitous. They were everywhere. And so this is kind of a model to help you think about the context. The other part around knowledge mobilization that I think is important and is part of stretching, it's really the part that's stretching beyond the academy and is creating those relationships. And so hence our title of, inside, outside, and beside the academy, is that content is important, but organizational individual capacity is important, culture is important, context is important, and I think that even more important are conversations, right? That they're, again, within a systems perspective, that there's an interaction between all of these concepts. And just to give you an idea, this is an example taken from Phil Davies, who I just saw in Toronto.
Did you?
Yeah, he was in town. He asked in his, if you ever have a chance to read his paper called Is Evidence-Based Government Possible? You can download it on the web for free. It was the Jerry Lee lecture in 2004 in Washington. And in asking that question, his answer was maybe. But one of the challenges was, what do we consider to be evidence, right? So that if we talk about only scientific evidence, no, evidence-based government is not possible, right? If we're only talking about, because decisions sometimes get made contrary to evidence, sometimes in spite of the evidence, and decisions are still being made even when there is no evidence. And so all of these factors are part of the ecology of knowledge, right? So we have judgment and resources and experience and pragmatics and contingencies.